All right, we just hit top of the hour. We appreciate everyone tuning in. You've got Bobby and Nate here from Voltage, and today we're really excited to have our guest, Stephan Livera. You guys probably know him from the Stephan Livera podcast, and he's always picking the minds of some of the greatest folks in Bitcoin. But today we get to pick into his mind and just peer into some of his insights. So, man, we really appreciate you joining us.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
All right, well, cool. I know most people here are very privy to your podcast and the content you create, but what I would really like to kind of discuss and frame this conversation around is, you're always asking questions and listening, so you have some diverse insights, and I think you can connect the dots in ways a lot of us can't. But I know you also work in the venture arm, so maybe tell people a little bit about some of the venture stuff you do and just a broader kind of a breakdown of just how you're viewing Lightning, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, sure. So basically, we have this thing called Bitcoin Adventures. Now, to be clear, it's me and three other partners. We take zero carry to us, right? There are some platform fees, but basically, right now, it's a syndicate for accredited investors, and we invest in basically Bitcoin-only companies and Bitcoin projects that we think are doing something useful or meaningful or building in the direction that we want. And so I think the way I'm thinking about some of this stuff, obviously you need to have a Bitcoin bag before you even think about buying some Bitcoin companies as well, right? If you're bullish on the space, you should obviously hold Bitcoin. But for some people, if they want to push the space in a certain direction, or if they want to see certain products existing, then it might be value add to put some of that fiat you have into some of these Bitcoin companies. So that's the high level insight. And actually, for anyone interested, a really cool article I read, and this is going back 2013 or 2014, it's called The Correct Strategy of Bitcoin Entrepreneurship by Daniel Krawietz. Now, to be clear, this Daniel Krawietz later became a Bcasher, a big blocker, but it was an interesting article, and this is before all that. And so the thesis he's pointing out in that article is this idea that you want to help Bitcoin become a money, right? If you believe that, then what technologies, what infrastructure, what software, what companies are required for that to become a reality? And so the thesis is essentially buy Bitcoin and then invest in the right kinds of things that might help you turn Bitcoin into money. And so it's also this idea that especially in the early days of Bitcoin, which I still believe we are in the early days of Bitcoin, you will probably get more by trying to grow the pie than trying to compete with other people in that same ecosystem per se. So I think that's an interesting idea when you think about investing, first holding Bitcoin as your savings, as your unit of account, everything. And then also thinking, well, what companies am I going to invest in? What ventures am I going to put into? And so the Bitcoin Adventures thing, bringing it back to that, is basically we get inbound and we get, because we're all out in the ecosystem. And so the other partners, so it's Corey Clipston. He's the CEO and founder of Swan. Jan Pritzker, he's the CTO and founder of Swan. And also Lewis from Mimesis Capital. And so basically we get inbound, or we talk to different people who are building things in the Bitcoin space, and then just review the deck and maybe chat with them and figure out if there's an opportunity for us to also come in and invest. And then people in our syndicate can also invest as well. So basically, that's the main way it goes. And in terms of companies we have already put some investments into, we have a small piece in all of these companies, right? So we have Unchained Capital, Galloy, Revolt, BitRefill, Breeze, Impervious, and Zion. So a bunch of different companies, all building different things in the space. And I think it's just cool to see that, when you're part of that, you're also an investor in some of the companies that you might also patronize yourself. Like an example, Unchained Capital or BitRefill or these other companies that are well known to us in the Bitcoin space. So just a few thoughts there.
Awesome. So right now, so you get to talk to a lot of folks who are building on Bitcoin and Lightning, and you get some very unique perspective, I think, seeing what people want to build. And you guys obviously say yes to some deals, no to others. What do you find to be the most compelling opportunity, and just what is being built on Lightning that you're most excited about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I think companies that are doing stuff like a BitRefill are super cool. Like, I just find that really awesome. Like, being able to it just makes it feel real. Because even for me, when I'm out there orange pilling, or if I'm at a meetup and then I'm teaching someone about Lightning, I can show them on the spot. I can think, and depending on, or if it's a friend or a family person who I'm closer with, I might literally buy them a voucher on the spot just to show them. And, as an example, you could, depending on which country they're in, you might be able to give them phone credit on the spot and pay with Lightning. And for a lot of people, seeing is believing. So for them, you might say, okay, hey, what's your phone number? What's your provider for that, or whatever? Is it this company or that company? And if they're on BitRefill, and you can just instantly, you know, recharge them $10 or whatever, and then they just see it come through and they see you just make a Lightning payment. I just think that's so cool. So I'm really bullish on that idea. I'm also super bullish on, like, I just think it's so cool to see the Bitcoin Beach stuff and Galloy Money and what they're doing to make Bitcoin banking out of a box happen. I think those aspects are really awesome to see. So yeah, I think those are some ideas, and Breeze as well as like a wallet that tries to make it like a Bitcoin mobile Lightning wallet that really tries to make you. They're trying to make you self-sovereign even off a phone, using various trade-offs, of course, things like neutrino style syncing and things like that. But yeah, I think those are a few ideas off the top of my head. Yeah, it comes down to just things that can help make it real for people. And that's where I think probably BitRefill is probably one of the best examples of that, because it's just like, it's leveraging the power of brands that people already know, and you're just buying them something or buying something for yourself and showing people, hey, this is how you can actually live on Bitcoin today if you want to.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great. Very cool. Nate.
Yo, yeah, no, I want to jump in on that bit refill thing a little bit because I don't know if it's still invite only or if anyone can do it, but they recently added, at least in the US, a bill pay system, which is essentially PayPal, pay bills with PayPal, but pay bills with Bitcoin. So, all the banks, mortgages, whatever, you can essentially put in your account number on BitRefill and pay your mortgage with Bitcoin. It is a KYC thing though, but I think that is amazing. And I've used it already a little bit because I got invited to the beta on it. And as someone who has the goal of really adopting a Bitcoin standard, and my checking account not really seeing much activity, like that's like my ultimate goal. Like I use BitRefill a lot already, and just having that as an option is really cool. So I'm happy you brought up BitRefill because I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, I had Sergey on the show recently, and we spoke a little bit about the bill payment aspect. I'm not in the US myself, but if I was, I'd think about it. So yeah, for me, my BitRefill use is more about just picking vouchers here and there, whether it's like phone credit or the occasional Amazon voucher, or different things. Like I've used the hotels one on there as well. And yeah, there's all kinds of different ones on there, but people, you do like grocery ones, so all kinds of ways that you can use that. Of course, it's such a personal thing as well, because like some people are like, no, hodl forever, and then other people are more like, no, like you should spend a little bit, and then other people are like, well, hey, I'm all in, so I don't have any other way to to make ends meet. I got to spend my Bitcoin. But nevertheless, I think it's really cool that we've got that option. It's there. It's really convenient now, and it's just really slick. It's a really slick experience. At least for me, it has been. So I understand. It's still early days, still, even though we are only a few years into Lightning mainnet, there's improvements coming and happening all the time. So it's exciting.
In conjunction, like BitRefill, in conjunction with Pay with Moon, which is the basically gives you a virtual Visa debit card for Lightning. Those two like combined is well over like 80% probably of what most people's expenses would need. And the cool thing too is you can buy a Visa gift card on Pay with Moon for Lightning, and then you can add that to Google Pay or Apple Pay on your phone, and you're good to go. Now you can go to the mall basically. So I think that's really cool too.
Yeah, for sure. I think, there's all kinds of ways people find to try to like really close that loop if they want to fully live on Lightning. I think sometimes people have to have a little bit of cash that they will sell on a peer-to-peer exchange or something if they need to meet those last few things that they can't directly pay Bitcoin for. But for example, in the US, you can get Uber paid with Lightning as well, like via BitRefill, obviously. But in other countries, it won't work that way. And I mean, there's different ones that you can use. So those are a few ones there that work. I think it's just a cool thing to see. But for a lot of people, it's just saving. And hey, there are a lot of people who are going to be earning Bitcoin, and that's how they get it. They're not going to be they're not necessarily going to be like buying it per se. They might be earning it, and so what are the flows? What are the ways to make that work as well?
Right on. Well, I'd love to pivot and talk a little bit about Taro. And I know this is like very technical and very early on, Stephan, so we don't have to go too deep down the rabbit hole on this. But what are your initial thoughts about Taro and the opportunities it creates? If you could share any just perspective on the new technology that Lightning Labs is building.
Yeah, sure. So this is another one. I recently did an episode with Laulu, so that one's there for anyone who wants to listen to me quizzing Laulu further on it. But in terms of how I think about it, it's interesting to see some development. So the history of it is that in the earlier days, there was like various ideas like colored coins. There was this thing called counterparty, and RGB is probably the most recent one that was like a predecessor idea, or maybe arguably competing idea with Taro. And so it's interesting that they really leveraged Taproot with Taro, so that's really interesting to see where they went with that. Still remains to be seen. Is that the one that wins in the ecosystem? Right, we have to sort of let the market decide what is going to be the preferred method. I could see an argument where, let's say, the Tether aspect is just more important, and people use as an example, the synonym or whatever the wallet comes out from that team, because that's already part of Bitfinex, and they've already got sort of the hookup there with Lightning and everything there. But that said, there's nothing stopping, because Taro is a protocol that leverages Taproot, there's nothing stopping people creating their own stablecoins and putting it onto Taro. And so in the same way that Tether exists on various different networks, obviously it's on Liquid, it's on various shitcoins, and it could also go on Taro, and there's nothing in principle stopping it from being an asset that is transferred on Taro. And so I don't want to try to explain in deep detail about what it is, because I'm wary that I'll get it wrong in terms of my explanation of it. But the high-level idea that I understand is that you're sort of piggybacking off the existing Lightning network, but in a way where only the end nodes have to have, and I think the second to last node have to know about that Taro asset. So we might have our Lightning channels open, and let's say a lot of those intermediary nodes do not have Taro, or they do not speak Taro per se, but only you and I think the second to last, or the penultimate node, and obviously the final person, the person you're trying to pay or receive from, they have to obviously speak Taro per se. And so then this is like another way that people can transfer non-Bitcoin assets. And so that'll be really interesting to see if people do all the stablecoin stuff there. it it remains to be seen, but maybe there's a privacy thing here as well. Like, what if people wrap Bitcoin up on the Taro network and send it that way? And is there a privacy benefit there as well? I don't know. But nevertheless, with all the drama that we're seeing with UST and Luna, maybe people are getting more bearish on stablecoins, or at least on algo stablecoins. And so maybe the innovation is going to be seen more in that direction of doing it like in alternate methods, not the algo stablecoin style. So either in a Tether style where it's backed or meant to be backed by USD or bonds or other assets or securities. And then I guess there are other approaches as well, right? So there is the whole DLC stablecoin approach, and that could also leverage Lightning. I've done an episode with Chris Stewart about that. And then there's more like a, let's say, manual trading bot approach. So I've done an episode with Nicholas Bertie from Galloway as well on that kind of approach. And so that would be more like the operator of the node of, let's say, in this as an example, Bitcoin Beach node might be running a little trading bot that interacts with an exchange, and then that's kind of like a way of them providing it as a service for the users of the Bitcoin Beach wallet. I mean, hypothetically. And so that's something Nicholas was talking about as well. So there's a few ideas there around how this whole stablecoin thing goes. I don't use stablecoins myself. I obviously understand that there are reasons why other people use them. Of course, I would prefer everyone to just go straight to Bitcoin. But I understand whenever I'm in other countries, or particularly in developing countries, or even LATAM, as I was in El Salvador last year, it became a lot more, it was almost like every person coming up was talking about stablecoins, and it just seemed, whereas those of us in the Western world, we don't really think that much about stablecoins. I think most of us are, at least in the Bitcoin community, we're probably more just thinking, no, I just want to stack sats. What, now I guess the argument would be, hey, are we having our financial privilege, and should we check our financial privilege because we've got access to USD or to euro or to pound or whatever? So, yeah. But at the end, yeah, go on.
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, Nate, what are your thoughts? What do you think about Taro? I know you're digging into this too.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much with Stephan on it. Like, I'm curious to see it play out. I'm curious to play with it when it comes out also. But as a Bitcoiner though, that is really having a good time trying to manage and sell liquidity on Lightning as sort of a hobby, I'm really excited for the implications of this increasing volume and demand for liquidity on Lightning, because that would, be good for me and be good for other people trying to sell liquidity on Lightning. So I think that's really exciting. And if the Taro-based transactions on the network really take off, then volume on the Lightning Network itself will increase, which means you can get more fees possibly for routing. So I think it's kind of exciting for just routing node operators, because you don't have to opt into anything. It's just going to increase supposedly.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be increasing your volume. You might get more forwards. It might even help mask some of the traffic on the Lightning Network, because now if you don't know that forward was relating to a Lightning Bitcoin payment, or it was actually relating to a Taro payment, right? So maybe there's a little bit more noise on the network, and maybe that helps even from a privacy point of view. Even if you were just I don't give a shit about non-Bitcoin assets, you might still get a privacy benefit in that aspect too. And you might get a benefit just in terms of payments, right? More routing, more forwards, more activity, more network growth. I think the interesting question as well, while we're here, is obviously it would be beneficial if this is not just an LND thing, but also other nodes and other Lightning implementations and other clients also adopt this kind of thing, where right now we don't know. So it's kind of competing standards, and we're hoping to see more and more people get into it. So yeah, obviously this is all very, very early stuff. It's very early days, and so it's just so crazy and difficult to predict where it's all going to go.
I think that's an interesting point because right now, as it stands, if it was to be just LND only, other implementations are still going to be routing Taro payments. So it's which is kind of funny in a way, but I don't know. Maybe CLN and Lightning Labs can do a trade-off, put liquidity ads on LND and put Taro on CLN. Maybe they could do a little trading of
But I
protocol
mean,
or something.
but the liquidity ads part, I can understand why. Well, would that kind of cut against the business model of Lightning Labs? I don't know. Maybe,
Right.
but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's just spitballing because these teams are developing actual, higher level protocols. I wouldn't call it like layer 3 or 4, but like just building out layer 2 maybe. And
Yeah.
I would love to see more interoperability. And I think, I don't know. Hopefully the spec devs and stuff work it out. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see it, and hey, there's going to be competition, right? I think if you take a John Carvalho view of the network, he sees it like there's not one Lightning network, there's actually multiple Lightning networks, and they all are sort of operating in a weird kind of parallel way, and so it's up to them how interoperable they want the Lightning network to be. So now, of course, you could make an argument against that and say, no, well, hang on, that's kind of cutting the network effect of Lightning Network, and you want it to have at least some base level of interoperability that, let's say, I use wallet A and you use wallet B or node B, and we can still pay each other rather than having this weird, crazy scenario where maybe different features aren't all supported and that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I would say that as long as your implementation is following at least the first 10 bolts, like bolt 11 isn't really necessary. Like maybe you want to do like an LN URL specific implementation, I don't know who, but somewhere. I think, I don't know, as long as you're doing those first 10 bolts, it should be basically interoperable. But I wish we had someone from the spec team on stage to talk to you about that, because I'm not, I can't go into too big detail because I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, certainly I don't consider myself a technical expert on these either, but I think it also does come down to development time and priorities in the different implementations, because, it started with 3, but now there's, what used to be Square Crypto, now Spiral, have their Rust Lightning LDK stuff going. There's Electrum. There's like some smaller ones out there. And then, inside that, there's all this whole ecosystem of different wallets and dashboards and different tools and all these different pieces that have to interact with each other.
Stephan, I want to ask you a question, if that's okay, Bobby. Real quick.
Please.
Yeah, no, I just want to ask you, Stephan, because you've been in the space a while. You saw sort of the birth of Lightning in 2018 and stuff. When you were first learning about it back then, maybe running your first node and stuff, now we are sort of 4 years later. Is this, are you surprised that we're at where we're at in the Lightning Network, or did you imagine something more back then? If you can, I don't know, give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so Lightning, I think, I can't remember exactly, someone correct me, but I think the white paper came in maybe 15 or 16, around there. But then first mainnet was actually 2018. But even then, that was like super early. I think at that point, I was only playing around with like Lightning phone wallets just because that was easier. I think I did play around like maybe spinning up a very quick node, but not actually doing much with it. I always like struggled with some of that stuff. And then later, probably about, I think 2019 was when I actually started running a Lightning node. I think that's how it went down. Yeah, because I think 2019 was also when like the whole Lightning Torch thing happened. And so that was kind of like when a lot of actual new Lightning nodes came on that weren't developer nodes. And so that was also like a very early thing. In terms of, so to answer your question in terms of where is it at relative to what I thought it would be, I guess it's probably been, well, I mean, to say like an entire nation, right? Like theoretically, like El Salvador, that's theoretically millions of people who could use the Lightning Network. So in that way, we're actually ahead of where I thought we would be. Now, I think some things that maybe we thought would be easier or would have been simpler maybe turned out to be a bit harder or came out a little differently than what we thought they would. So as an example, maybe autopilot, right? Like this idea that everything would just be kind of automatically done in the background. Well, that one didn't quite come out into fruition. There were other ideas like, as an example, splicing, right? Like that was an idea people spoke about in the earlier days. And splicing, so for people who don't know, splicing the ability, like let's say you've already got a channel open, and the idea is instead of closing that channel, you could make an on-chain payment out of that channel, and it's like a resizing of that channel. Or another way is, let's say you want to increase the size of a channel, instead of you having to close it and then reopen it, you're taking some other on-chain funds and then splicing it into your channel to resize the channel bigger. So those are some ideas that hopefully will come to fruition, and that will help as part of the Lightning node runners toolkit in terms of whether they want to splice instead of closing and reopening. It might be useful in scenarios where they are doing rebalancing. Like there's all these kind of different aspects and decisions you have to make because you're thinking, hey, do I use a swap provider? Do I do I use Lightning Pool? Do I use bolts.exchange? Do I, try to swap off-chain for on-chain? There's all these different decisions you have to make. So that whole ecosystem of it, and like I guess the automation of it as well. Like I would say another big point came when Phoenix Wallet launched. And so this was around the time of the Lightning conference. So we're talking late 2019, early 2020, where they had this whole idea of like non-custodial, but still on-the-fly channels and turbo channels, right? This idea that the channel could open without it being confirmed yet, but you're at least trusting a little bit just while that channel is opening and confirming on chain, but you could get started really soon or really quickly. And so that gave it like this consumer friendly, retail friendly phone wallet that gave you a really slick experience. And so, those kinds of innovations really moved the needle forward in terms of what was possible and how to make the experience really slick for the end user. Because up until then, people were doing things like on Eclair mobile wallet back then, where you had to just manually open and close channels, and you just had to like manually think about my inbound liquidity so that I could receive, and like it was just very manual. So those things have all changed, and having LSPs, this whole ecosystem of Lightning service providers who are providing the underlying channels or giving you that liquidity, helping you swap in and out of Lightning and into on-chain. Of course, longer term, like we see all of this is going to go into the background, right? Like hopefully with something like BIP21 or otherwise, we end up just having one QR code and people don't really even think too much about Lightning. Although obviously today we think about, oh yeah, you've got your Bitcoin balance and your on-chain balance and your Lightning balance, but really, yeah, the longer term vision is to smooth it all out into the background, and the end user just thinks I'm just making a Bitcoin payment and that's all.
Right on. Stephan, so one of the things that really caught my attention, I can't remember, it was a few weeks ago, I think it was episode 367 with Pierre Richard, but he was sharing some thoughts about how channels could be like multiple people could contribute to them, and just some of these like really far out there, like fascinating ways in which Lightning can operate. But after hearing a lot of the stuff he shared in that podcast, it made me think deeply about what's possible. But what was your takeaway after talking with him? Because I know he has a lot of ideas and just things exchanges should do, and just tell me more on just how that left you after you had spoken with him.
Yeah, always great to chat with my friend Pierre. Pierre is one of my first friends in the space, actually. So I remember back in, I think this is 2013 or 14, Bitcoin Twitter was not a thing back then. It was all Reddit, and I was interacting with Pierre back then in those days. And so that was kind of how we first found each other online as like the, Bitcoiners chatting online. And we both came from a similar point of view, being into Austrian economics. And so I think we just bonded from that as well. But yeah, in terms of that episode, I think some interesting takeaways for me were just this idea that it's starting out by big platforms and exchanges and businesses plugging into Lightning. So as we spoke about on that show, right? Kraken with their millions of customers, you've got Cash App with their 20 or 30 million customers. You got Robinhood, who is coming on, who said they're going to do Lightning and they're going to make it available for their customers. You got Paxful with their millions of customers, probably like 5 to 10 million customers. You got Chivo with another, 4 million customers. Like, you got all these millions of customers who are eventually being able to spend using Lightning or receive using Lightning, but they are custodial or they are not as self-sovereign. And so then the challenge is, over time, how do you get that to the point where people can be self-sovereign for various reasons, right? To make sure the network is resilient, it's robust, to give people the chance for privacy if that's what they want, to make it so that the network is not just only big entities, but self-sovereign users, and just so that people can do open commerce as well, right? Like, if you want to run your business and you want to spin up your Lightning node so that you can take payment, that's a possibility for you. So, over time, these things will get easier. The tooling will get better and better. I think we can be impatient in some ways. Like, we're like, why isn't it here now? Why isn't everyone using Lightning straight away? But I think it really does require us to zoom out and think, well, where was Bitcoin in 4 years in, right? So Bitcoin, the Genesis block, January 2009. Where was Bitcoin in 2013? Well, okay, so there were no hardware wallets at that point. A lot of people were using custodial exchanges and wallets because there was no, Andreas had not popularized the saying, not your keys, not your coins yet. Like, it was that early, right? It was not easy to, let's say, use your own node with your own hardware wallet. Back then, there was an armory, right? So people had this kind of offline armory. And I remember back in those days, I had an offline armory wallet and my online node. And so that was kind of like your early days hardware wallet. So that's where the ecosystem was in 2013, right? When I showed up, when I was a new coiner in 2013, and when I was a noob, that's what it was. And so you think now where Lightning is, it's not as easy to be a self-sovereign Lightning user today, but it'll take time. And so, arguably, it was like, you could arguably say, if you're thinking from a context of using your own node with your own hardware wallet, that was not simple for a non-technical user for a long time, up until arguably 2019 or 2020, around there. Because that's when these node in a package, node box solutions came out, right? You had the Nodl, MyNode, and so on, who were the innovators there. Up until that, it was hard to actually run your own Electrum server and connect that with your own hardware wallet. Like, it was just not an easy thing. Like, we think it's easy now, but back then a lot of people were just using, say, Trezor or Ledger or something, and just using Trezor or Ledger's node, which, okay, for that time, like, at least you're not being custodial, at least you're being self-custodial, but you weren't being able to use it with your own node, right? Like, kind of that dream of being the fully self-sovereign person. So, in the same way, we're only 4 years in, and the technology and the tools and the understanding is just not easy yet, but I think it is getting easier and easier over time. So I think those are a few reflections looking back and contrasting Lightning's history with, say, Bitcoin's history.
No, that's great. So one other thing before we dive into a Q&A with some of the folks that are here listening, but Nate has been tweeting today, and Michael Levin from Lightning Labs was sharing some insights earlier last week about how the APY and just the return on supplying liquidity to Lightning is quite high, like in the 15 to 20+% range. Are you supplying liquidity at all to the network, or what are your thoughts just on this developing as more awareness is created, especially during these crazy times where there's Ponzi's imploding and Lightning gives very unique opportunity to people who do want to create yield?
Yeah, well, I definitely saw Nate's tweet. I thought that was really cool. Very cool example. I think for me, I do run a Lightning node, and I wouldn't say I'm like a big routing node or anything. I just have like a small number of channels. I'm not really trying to be like a big lightning node on the network. I just sort of have it just to learn. Really, it's more like an educational thing. But then, yeah, I do use that node to make payments and receive some payments. I haven't gone deeply into the stuff around like selling channels or anything like that. I think it is still early days, so it's hard to make statements about where it's going and what kind of interest rates are on offer. And I think the question from my point of view is more like, well, there might be times and places at which, yeah, you can get like a good return from it, but how sustainable is that? Like, how ready is the network to sort of support that on a regular basis? I think it's just one area where, in truth, I don't have a lot of like deep in practice hands-on knowledge on that specific aspect of it, just because, it's a big space and there's so many things out there that I'm not as close to that.
It totally takes some effort to try to get insight into the market, but the fun part is you don't have to really worry about losing your money. Like that's what makes it fun in a lot of ways. So like on Lightning Pool, it shows you sort of the last few matches and what basis points or fees people are paying for channels, and it's up there near like 100 right now basis points, which is hilarious in a weird way because when Lightning Pool first came out, it was the ask side that was really, really heavy. And right now we've seen a flip. And I talked to Mr. Levin from Lightning Labs about it, and he said, "Yeah, we're seeing a lot more bid pressure than ask pressure, which is a lot different compared to when Lightning Pool came out like a year and a half ago." So I find that really interesting. That it's a seller's market on Lightning Pool right now, but how sustainable that is, it's anybody's guess for sure.
Awesome. Well, guys, we'll open this up. If you would like to ask Stephan a question, please raise your hand. I know a lot of folks can be shy when it comes to this, but raise your hand. We'll spend a couple of minutes and give some time. But until people come up, Stephan, if you were to share maybe some lightning futuristic assumptions and just guesses, like if you were having to be like a thought leader and just kind of put yourself out there, what would you think is going to come to Lightning in the future? That's a personal question I have. Like, where do you see things being built that we don't have yet?
Good question. I think it's just like, of course, I'm bullish on a bunch of things, right? There's Lightning gaming and things like this, which I'm sure we're going to see plenty of that. We're seeing, the likes of Impervious and Zion trying to build things out in terms of the Lightning on top of the Lightning network. I think for me, I'm really focused on seeing that real world, just day to day, and even like peer to peer. I would love to see like peer to peer Lightning for people who are trying to earn, or even just peer to peer trading. I'd love to see more of that. I know, for example, Paxful has is sort of going in that direction of having Lightning and available in many countries around the world. I think for me, I'm excited to see that happen and people just start doing remittance, but just stay in Lightning, right? As opposed to remittance and trying to do it back to, the local fiat coins. I'd love to see more and more people just go in Lightning and stay in Lightning. Obviously, that's some ways off. I see it like we have to get enough adoption in terms of people who are holders, and then from then on, we start to enter that question of how many of those people will then day-to-day spend, right? Because I am a day-to-day Lightning user, but I also understand that for many people, maybe they're more casual in this aspect of it, and they're happy to just stack and hodl, which I totally understand. That's totally reasonable. But it's just going to take time to grow that user base and grow the number of people who are just using it just for all kinds of things, whether it's tipping each other or paying each other back. Like if you go out to a restaurant, one person pays and everyone tips them back or pays them back in Lightning, ideally using a Lightning address or some kind of LN URL setup, like a more advanced way. I mean, all these things are so cool to see. And yeah, I'd love to see, like, looking further out, I'd love to see the whole NE-Prev out and L2 come to fruition, right? Like this idea of multi-party channels and this whole idea of enabling just mass scale and still having people be able to self-custody while still doing this kind of crazy multi-party channel stuff. I know that may be years down the line. We may never get it, to be honest. I'd love to see it, though. So I think those are some of the ideas I'd love to see come to the Lightning Network.
I just want to jump in there because, like, I went to Walmart yesterday, and every time I go to Walmart now, because I know they use NCR, I always hit the other payments option on the self-checkout, hoping that Strike Commerce will be there so I can bust out my Zeus wallet. I'm just like, come on, let's go. But it's
Love
not
it.
there yet. But I'm looking forward to whenever that deploys. I think that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, it'd be so cool to just like fully earn and spend. I mean, hey, if you're willing to go to El Salvador, well, then you can do that today. But you know, I think not everyone's willing to move countries yet.
Stephan, I've been hearing some things behind the scenes too, and again, everyone listening, please feel free to raise your hand. We have a gentleman, Mr. Hoddle, raising his hand. I'm gonna add him as a speaker real quick. I'll hold my question, but Hoddle, as soon as you get on stage, please feel free to ask yours here. Hey, Hoddle21, did you have a question you'd like to share with Stephan?
Hey guys, yeah, sorry. Thanks a lot for hosting this. Appreciate the insight. Not sure how much of the conversation I missed. I jumped on just not too long ago, but I had a question, Stephan. Where do you guys feel we're at with hardware development right now, and where is it going to be to where maybe we end up with a multi-purpose device that's a miner, a full node, and a Lightning node all together, all in one? Is there development there, and where are we heading with that?
So there have been various ideas with this, but here's the challenge, right? Bitcoin miners are very loud and very hot. Now, with that said, as I understand, I was following, I think at Bitcoin 2022, I wasn't able to follow everything, but I believe there were one or two projects where they were trying to tackle this kind of idea in maybe a miner device that's kind of down powered. Like it's not like a full on, Bitmain X19 or one of these new Watts miner M31 level, but it might be like a miner that intentionally keeps it a bit lower, so that way you can do a bit of everything. Now, historically, some of the devices that have been trying to do this in the space have been, let's say, very underpowered and not very cost effective. But the hope it would be for that idea is that going forward, maybe someone does it, especially now that we're approaching the era of less. We're approaching that sort of human ingenuity limit, or some of those limits in terms of like the wafer chips and things like that, where if this project was done 4 or 5 years ago, then that device would go out of life really soon. Whereas nowadays there's a longer useful life to these things, so it might make more sense. Or even people talk about this idea of like, oh, could it be built into the heaters or things like that, right? But yeah, it just comes back to like, how do you manage the heat? How do you manage the noise? At least as far as I understand it, that's like if you're integrating a miner. Now, in terms of like the node stuff, obviously there's a bunch of node projects out there. You can just buy a node. You can just set it up on a VPS. You can set it up on a box. Like, I think we will eventually get to a point where it's probably similar to like your router, right? Like you buy your router and maybe your gateway, and maybe people just build in a Bitcoin node into that, right? Like maybe that just becomes a common thing. We're not there yet, but that's perhaps one feasible direction that you could see it go. Of course, you wouldn't keep too many coins on that. That would be like a hot device, and you would have like hardware wallets that you connect to that. Maybe you can have like an Electrum server on there and things like that. But maybe you would have a Lightning node on there with a smaller amount of, spending sats, your checking account, or whatever however you want to think of it. That could work.
No, absolutely, and it kind of leads into the other question I was kind of going to ask around that, is that heat energy. So that's the next purpose for these devices, right? Heat is energy, so why don't we use that heat to develop other things? Dry your clothes and heat your house, and that's obviously, I'm sure that's all being talked about with current ESG discussions as well. So, but thanks for your thoughts on that, Stephan.
I want to just add a little color on that, if you don't mind. So
yeah, go on, Nick.
At the conference, it was FutureBit, I think. So they have a device, and I don't think it's actually profitable for the energy usage, but I think you can get like 3.8 terahashes out of it, but it also runs a Bitcoin node, and it's actually like a computer. Like, it has a CPU. I think it has Linux built into it. So you run it like you would run a MyNode or an Umbrel. It just has like a little hash board in there also. But I did a little bit of math on it, and I don't think it's very profitable if you're doing normal consumer energy rates, like 14, 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So keep an eye on that. But it was the FutureBit Apollo was one of those projects there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you've got it right there. And so basically, if you were going to try to do that to mine, it would be, so some home miners are doing it more from the point of view of trying to get non-KYC sats. And so for that, they see it like, I'm paying my electricity bill and I'm okay with a little bit of a premium because I see that like a non-KYC premium, right? That's for some people. That's how they see it. In other cases, it's like ideological mining. They're mining for the sake of, they believe in the idea of the censorship-resistant, permissionless Bitcoin, and they're mining to help defend that vision in some small way, in some loose sense, right? So yeah, and to the point about like trying to do everything together, like try to use I think it may just be that while the idea sounds like it would work, I think in practice, if you're in a place that's not always cold, well, then you're not always going to have the heater on. So then are you buying this equipment that's not going to be utilized all the year round? And then, okay, maybe it would only make sense in the cold places that are cold all year round. And then you get where I'm going with this, right? Like, it might not be the most efficient way as compared to people who are just literally treating it like a business. Or let's say the other way is to kind of do it like an upstream data way, where they have this like what's it called, the black box, where people literally set up a box that stops the noise and the heat, and they set it up in their backyard, and they're plugging in maybe 1 or 2 miners into that. And so maybe that's the way to go if we're talking about retail mining and just kind of everyday home miner.
Yeah, right. The industrial miners, for at least the short term, obviously are going to have the upper hand for some time. So, agreed.
Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions, Stephan, we really appreciate you being here with us today and taking some time. And we'll have to do it again sometime in the future. So we appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Had a great time. Thanks for inviting me, and great to chat with everyone.
All right, guys.
Well, Stephan, thank you.
Feel free to jump in here. We'll be scheduling these every Wednesday, as much as we can, to talk Lightning and more. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.